Right, listen up. Forget what you think you know about World War I being just blokes and muddy trenches for 4 years. We're diving into the dramatic final act, the whirlwind of events that actually brought the whole thing crashing to a halt.
Yeah, it's much more complex.
Think less stalemate, more a series of toppling dominoes that stretched way beyond the fields of France.
Exactly. Fast forward to late 1917, early 1918, and the war map looked drastically different. Russia, consumed by its own internal chaos, had effectively pulled out of the fight.
Which must have been huge news.
Massive. And it freed up a huge number of German troops. But waiting in the wings, like a heavyweight boxer about to enter the ring, was the United States, bringing with them a massive injection of fresh resources.
Right.
What we're going to unpack today is how these massive shifts, along with a few other crucial factors, all sort of clicked into place to finally silence the guns in November 1918.
And this is key stuff if you're doing GCSE history, looking at the First World War as this big global conflict, right? Seeing how all the pieces fit together.
Absolutely. It shows it wasn't just the Western Front.
Okay, let's get stuck into this Russian exit then. It sounds simple, they packed their bags and left. But what were the real shock waves of that decision?
Well, Russia's withdrawal wasn't a sudden huff and puff. It was the messy end result of deep-rooted problems tearing the country apart. You had the Tsarina, heavily influenced by this, rather shadowy character, Rasputin.
Ah, yes, Rasputin. Bit of a bogeyman figure.
Definitely. Whether he was actually a German spy or not, the rumor mill went into overdrive, and he became a powerful symbol of a government completely out of touch with what ordinary Russians were going through.
Even killing him didn't really fix things, did it? That was back in 1916.
No, the damage was done. Even his dramatic assassination couldn't repair the damage to the Tsar's authority.
And it wasn't exactly a smooth handbrake turn on the battlefield either, was it? That Kerensky offensive. What went wrong there?
Precisely. Launched in July 1917, the provisional government thought this offensive would reignite Russia's war effort and, boost morale. Instead, it was a complete disaster.
How bad are we talking?
We're talking about an estimated 400,000 Russian soldiers killed, huge retreats, and soldiers simply deserting in droves, just walking away.
Crikey. 400,000.
It was the final nail in the coffin for the provisional government's credibility and really accelerated the slide into revolution. This links directly to that conflict and tension theme in your GCSE, showing how internal pressures within a nation can have massive international consequences.
Which is where the Bolsheviks, those no-nonsense communists, come in.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Led by Vladimir Lenin, the Bolsheviks were a communist party with a very clear message: get Russia out of what they saw as a pointless imperialist war.
And they actually did it.
And as history shows, they delivered on that promise, fundamentally reshaping the war's dynamics for everyone else involved.
So Russia bowing out in 1917, that must have sent shockwaves across the Western Front.
Absolutely massive shockwaves. It allowed Germany to redeploy a huge number of battle-hardened troops and resources from the Eastern Front.
Straight over to France and Belgium.
Exactly, putting the already stretched Allied forces under even greater strain. For Germany, it looked like a golden opportunity, a chance to try and smash through the Allied lines and secure a decisive victory.
Before the Americans could properly arrive.
Before the full might of the Americans could be brought to bear, yeah. This highlights a key turning point in the conflict and tension, the shifting alliances and the impact of one major player leaving the stage.
Right, the Americans. Initially playing the role of the neutral observer, sitting comfortably on the sidelines, as we all learned. Isolationism was the big idea, wasn't it?
That's spot on. Back in 1914, when the war erupted across Europe, the official U.S. policy was one of neutrality, and there were several compelling reasons for it.
Like just being miles away.
Geographically, yeah, the Atlantic seemed like a pretty good buffer. Public opinion was overwhelmingly against getting tangled up in someone else's fight.
And wasn't there a big German population in the U.S. too?
Interestingly, yes. A significant chunk of the American population, around 10%, had German heritage, adding another layer of complexity. And economically, well, the U.S. was doing rather well supplying the Allies, so there wasn't a huge economic incentive to jump into the fray initially.
But that hands-off approach didn't last forever, did it? What were the key moments that dragged them in?
Two main things really swung the pendulum. First, Germany's increasingly aggressive U-boat campaign in 1917.
The submarine attacks.
Yeah, which led to the sinking of 8 American ships. This directly cost American lives and threatened their trade interests. Big time.
And then there was that top-secret message that went a bit public, the Zimmerman telegram. It's like something from a spy movie.
It practically was. Intercepted in March 1917, the Zimmermann telegram was arguably the final nail in the coffin of American neutrality. It was a coded message from Germany proposing a sneaky alliance with Mexico.
Mexico. Against the U.S.
Yes. And the really explosive bit. Germany offered Mexico financial support and weapons to attack the U.S. and reclaim territories like Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico.
Wow. No wonder they were furious.
You can imagine the uproar when that became public. For your GCSE, this is a brilliant example of how diplomatic actions, or maybe miscalculations, can escalate international tension and lead to direct involvement in conflict.
Crikey. That would definitely get people riled up. So the U.S. declares war in April 1917. Instant game changer on the battlefield.
Well, the declaration, yes, game changer. Eventually. The declaration was a monumental moment, but the actual impact wasn't immediate.
Takes time to get soldiers over there, I suppose.
Exactly. It took months to mobilize, train, and transport significant numbers of American soldiers, the doughboys, to the front lines. However, the psychological boost to the weary Allies was enormous.
Just knowing they were coming?
Knowing that this fresh, powerful nation was now on their side gave them a huge surge of morale, especially after the uncertainty of Russia's exit. And crucially, the U.S. brought desperately needed resources: oil, coal, food, weaponry, machinery.
The whole kit and caboodle.
Pretty much. This prospect was truly terrifying for Germany. Even with the Eastern Front now quieter, they faced a potentially even bigger threat in the West.
Which pushed them into that big attack.
Which directly led to their high-stakes gamble. The Spring Offensive.
Ah, yes. Germany's last-ditch effort. Knowing the Americans were coming, they must have felt the pressure. What was the thinking behind this big push in 1918? Ludendorff's big plan.
It was a calculated risk, definitely, driven by a cocktail of desperation and opportunity. The withdrawal of Russia and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk had freed up those crucial Eastern Front troops and supplies, creating a window of opportunity.
A window that was closing fast.
They knew it wouldn't last once the full might of the U.S. Army arrived. Germany itself was also in a dire state, facing severe shortages of everything after years of relentless war.
And the losses must have been horrific by then.
Oh, the brutal war of attrition, that strategy of just trying to wear the other side down through sheer loss of life, had already cost them nearly 1.3 million soldiers before 1918.
1.3 million.
And let's not forget the crippling impact of the British naval blockade, which was causing widespread starvation and crushing morale back home. This links right back to that GCSE theme of the impact of war on civilians.
So a real do-or-die situation for the Germans then.
Yeah.
What was the actual plan for this spring offensive? How did they think they could break through?
The German plan, largely the brainchild of General Ludendorff, involved launching a series of simultaneous, highly concentrated attacks on what they perceived as weaker points along British lines on the Western Front.
Find the weak spots and punch through.
Kind of. The idea was to punch through quickly and deeply, bypassing heavily defended areas to avoid getting bogged down and preventing a coordinated Allied counterattack. They unleashed specially trained stormtroopers elite units armed with machine guns, flamethrowers, and grenades to spearhead these attacks.
Stormtroopers. Sounds intimidating.
They were effective. Regular infantry would then follow up to secure the captured ground and try to encircle the British forces. Ludendorff's ultimate aim was to achieve a decisive breakthrough, hoping that a British collapse
would make the French give up too.
That was the hope, that the French would throw in the towel too.
Sounds like a properly aggressive plan. Did it work? Did they manage to break the deadlock of the trenches?
Initially, they did achieve some pretty significant breakthroughs, smashing through the Allied lines and gaining around 64 kilometers of territory, a huge amount by Western Front standards.
64 kilometers. That's massive after years of stalemate.
It really was. They even managed to retake parts of the Somme area and reach the River Marne, getting worryingly close to Paris. The British took a hammering, suffering around 177,000 casualties.
Oof.
So on the face of it, a major German success and a real threat to the Allies.
But those gains didn't last, did they? There must have been a cut.
Exactly. There always is, isn't there? While they made these impressive advances, the Germans couldn't sustain them. Their own resources were severely depleted. They simply didn't have enough soldiers, weaponry, or supplies to hold on to the captured territory.
They'd stretched themselves too thin.
Precisely. Their morale was also fragile after years of war. Crucially, the expected decisive breakthrough that would knock Britain out of the war didn't materialize. Meanwhile, American soldiers were now arriving in increasing numbers, reinforcing the Allied lines.
And the Allies were getting organized under Foch.
And the Allied Supreme Commander, General Foch, was already starting to plan a counterattack. The spring offensive, despite its initial shock value, ultimately overstretched the German army and left them dangerously exposed. This highlights the limitations of even successful military offensives in the context of the wider war effort.
Which brings us to the Allied response.
Yeah.
The 100 Days Offensive. That sounds like the beginning of the end for Germany.
Absolutely. Launched in August 1918 and continuing relentlessly until the Armistice in November, this was a sustained series of Allied attacks, brilliantly coordinated by General Foch, that pushed the exhausted German army back across the entire Western Front.
Relentlessly.
Just nonstop pressure. It was a masterclass in combined operations and marked a decisive shift in the momentum of the war.
After years of stalemate, what made this Allied offensive so different and so successful?
Several key factors combined. Firstly, the Allies had learned some hard lessons and had significantly improved their tactics. They were now using combined arms much more effectively.
What does that mean exactly? Combined arms?
That means carefully coordinating infantry attacks with supporting artillery fire, tanks to smash through barbed wire and machine gun posts, and aircraft for reconnaissance and even ground attacks.
So it's everything working together.
Yes, syncing it all up. Allied air power had also become increasingly dominant. Secondly, the sheer relentless pressure of the attacks. Unlike previous offensives with clearly defined start and stop points.
Like the Somme or Passchendaele.
Exactly. The 100 Days Offensive was a continuous series of blows, never allowing the Germans to properly regroup or catch their breath. Thirdly, under Foch's overall command, the British Army, led by Haig, played a crucial role, making significant advances in capturing huge numbers of German prisoners and artillery pieces.
Taking lots of prisoners and guns.
Around 200,000 prisoners and 3,000 guns, yeah. And finally, a truly pivotal achievement. The Allies managed to break through the heavily fortified Hindenburg Line.
That big German defense line.
A key German defensive network that had been considered almost impenetrable. This was a massive blow to German morale and a clear sign that their defenses were crumbling.
So militarily, the tide had well and truly turned. But it wasn't just battlefield defeats that brought Germany to its knees, was it? There was that long-standing naval blockade that had been strangling them for years.
Ah, the blockade, yes. The British naval blockade, in place since 1914, had a truly devastating long-term impact on the German home front.
How bad was it?
It effectively cut off the supply of food, raw materials, and other essential goods. This led to widespread shortages, with rationing introduced as early as 1915. By 1916, basic necessities like cheese, butter, and eggs were virtually impossible for ordinary Germans to obtain.
Just couldn't get them.
No. The winter of 1916-1917 became known as the turnip winter because that was often the only food available due to terrible harvests and the lack of imports.
The turnip winter. Grim.
It's estimated that around 425,000 German civilians died as a direct result of the malnutrition and disease caused by the blockade. This grim reality back home was a critical factor in undermining Germany's ability to continue the war.
That's a shocking human cost. And surely that kind of hardship and hunger led to serious unrest back in Germany.
Absolutely. It had to, didn't it? From 1915 onwards, there were growing protests and riots across Germany, fueled by the desperate food shortages, anger at the government, and disillusionment with this seemingly endless war.
People just had enough.
Completely fed up. This simmering discontent finally erupted in late October 1918 with the Kiel Mutiny.
What happened there?
German sailors based in Kiel were facing orders for a final, seemingly suicidal attack on British ships. They just refused to obey.
They mutinied.
They did, and this sparked a chain reaction of mutinies and the formation of workers' and soldiers' councils in major cities across Germany: Berlin, Munich, Hamburg, you name it. The Kaiser had completely lost control.
Lost control of the navy, the cities.
And the support of his own military leaders. This internal collapse was just as crucial as the military defeats in Germany's decision to seek an armistice.
So with the military collapsing on the Western Front and revolution brewing at home, the end was clearly in sight. That led to the Kaiser, the big boss, finally stepping down.
Yep. Facing widespread revolt and the complete loss of support from both the military and the people, Kaiser Wilhelm II was finally forced to abdicate on the 9th of November, 1918.
Gone. Just like that.
His departure marked the end of the German Empire and paved the way for a new government to seek peace.
Which led directly to Germany reaching out to the Allies to call it a day the Armistice.
Exactly. With their military in retreat, their home front in chaos, and their leader gone, Germany had no choice but to sue for peace. The armistice negotiations took place, famously, in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne in northern France.
In a train carriage.
Yes. The Germans hoped for a relatively lenient settlement based on President Wilson's 14 points, but the French, understandably, wanted to ensure Germany couldn't threaten them again.
They wanted payback, basically.
There was certainly a strong feeling of that. Ultimately, the terms imposed on Germany were very harsh, reflecting the immense suffering the war had caused. This negotiation process itself is a key element when studying the end of the conflict for your GCSE.
Can you just remind us of a couple of the really key conditions of that armistice signed on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918?
Some of the crucial terms included an immediate end to all fighting on the Western Front within 6 hours of the signing.
Stop shooting.
Pretty much, yeah. Germany was also required to evacuate all German-occupied territory in Belgium, France, and Luxembourg within a strict 15-day deadline. These conditions, among others, effectively stripped Germany of its ability to continue fighting.
So that was it. The guns finally fell silent? A truly monumental moment in history.
Absolutely. It marked the end of one of the deadliest and most transformative conflicts in human history, and the terms of the armistice laid the groundwork for the peace treaties that would follow, with all their own long-term consequences, of course.
Before we wrap up, we should probably touch on those key commanders again, Haig and Foch. They pop up a lot in this final phase.
Yes, definitely worth mentioning. You had Field Marshal Haig leading the British forces from late 1915 right to the end.
The one often called the Butcher of the Somme.
That's the one. He was responsible for major offensives like the Somme and Passchendaele, which involved horrific casualty rates, hence the nickname. He was initially a bit skeptical about new tech like tanks.
But he did use them eventually.
Yes, he authorized their use later on. And crucially, he led the British Army very effectively during that successful 100 Days offensive, albeit under Foch's overall strategic command. He ended the war a highly decorated general.
But still controversial.
Hugely. The historical debate continues. Some see his persistence and grasp of the bigger picture as vital for Allied victory, while others condemn his tactics and the sheer cost in lives.
And Foch, the French general.
Marshal Foch. He became the Allied Supreme Commander in the spring of 1918, right when things were looking pretty desperate during the German Spring Offensive. His key role was coordinating all the different Allied armies, British, French, American, Belgian, during those crucial final months.
So he was the big boss overseeing that final push.
Exactly. He orchestrated the strategy for the 100 Days offensive, that relentless pressure we talked about, which ultimately broke the German army, a pivotal figure in achieving the final victory.
Right. So thinking back over everything we've covered, Russia dropping out, the Americans joining the party, Germany's big gamble failing, the relentless Allied push, the blockade causing misery, and the internal chaos in Germany, it really highlights that the end wasn't down to just one thing.
No, definitely not.
There's a whole web of interconnected factors.
Precisely. Each of these elements played a crucial role in the final collapse of the Central Powers. It's a fantastic example for your GCSE studies of how different pressures, military, economic, social, diplomatic, can all combine to bring about the end of a major conflict.
It really makes you think. Considering all these different forces at play, which single event or development do you reckon had the most decisive impact on bringing the First World War to an end?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Was it the loss of a major ally for Germany, like Russia? The arrival of a powerful newcomer for the Allies, the USA? That final military knockout blow in the 100 Days? Or maybe the crumbling of morale on the home front because of things like the blockade?
Or a combination. It's tough to isolate just one.
It's definitely worth really chewing over how these different pieces of the puzzle fitted together to finally bring about peace in November 1918.
That's the crucial thing to ponder, yeah. Understanding how all these different strands intertwined is key to truly grasping why and how this devastating conflict finally came to an end.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for taking that deep dive into the end of the Great War with us. Loads to think about there.
My pleasure. It's a vital period to understand.
Until the next time.